gonna do. So today our topic is entrepreneurship and innovation through objectivism. And we'll talk about objectivism in career and passion pursuit, applying rational thinking into entrepreneurial ventures, balancing personal interests and business ethics, and etc. We are proud to represent Students for Liberty today, the largest pro liberty student organization in the world. And if you haven't done so, make sure that you grab your tickets for the LibertyCon International happening on February 2024 in Washington, D.C. So, before we delve into the topic, I also want to introduce our beloved guest. We have the privilege of hosting Professor Agarwal, a leading scholar in entrepreneurship and strategic management, who serves as a director of the Snider Center for Enterprise and Markets at the University of Maryland. And her extensive research and expertise make her the perfect guest today to explore objectivist principles and how we can actually relate it to entrepreneurial thinking, business ethics, individual creativity in organizations and markets. So, once again, thank you very much for joining us, Professor. Would you like to, first of all, start with a little bit background info about how you got started with objectivism?
Sure. Thank you, Leila. Thank you for inviting me. I really was, when I was in India, pursuing an undergraduate in economics, is the first time that I came across Atlas Shrugged. And in fact, reading it was fundamental, as I'm sure that you heard a lot of people say, into developing my sense of life, my philosophy, and the way I choose to live. So I guess right from about 17 or 18 years, I have immersed myself into learning and living the philosophy.
I see. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Yes.
And when it comes to like the relation between objectivism and career choices, how would you think that objectivism actually influences the pursuit of passions for an individual?
So, and this is where objectivism also marries with the research and the teaching that I do today in innovation and entrepreneurship and creativity and strategy. And in fact, largely influenced by both my research and my knowledge of objectivism principles, one of the things that I often say to young adults who are at the cusp of adulthood, taking ownership of their lives, that really you should be thinking of yourself as a CEO of My Enterprise Inc. And what does being a CEO of My Enterprise Inc. really mean? It means that you answer the four fundamental questions that every CEO should ask. What is my purpose? What problems do I want to solve in this world that are deeply meaningful for me? Or, as John Allison often says, you want to make the world a better place to live by doing something important to you. And that by doing something important to you is exactly where the first part, making the world a better place, doesn't become a bromide, doesn't become a selfless act. Because really, what is your world? Your world are the places you go, the things that you do, and the people that you meet. And these are all your individual choices. And if you're making these choices, you want to be thinking about, well, what are my value systems? What's important to me? Why should I not give up a higher value for a lower value? So that allows you to think about the problems that you encounter in your world, and you naturally want to make it better because these are your choices and they're important to you. The second question that I ask is, what does success mean for you? And often we think about success in careers in terms of status, in terms of salaries, but those are outcomes. You get used to your salary. It becomes something that, when you get a raise or you get a promotion, you're excited, but then it becomes status quo very quickly. What is it that really gets you going? And there, it's your ability to say, I love what I do and I'm good at it. Now, having that framework means that you're, Leila, to your point, thinking about what is it that you're passionate about? What is it that you love doing? But also complementing it with what am I good at? And notice that once you focus on success based on what activities you're doing on a day to day basis, the framing changes and it also creates a very virtuous cycle. So, what's the virtuous cycle? If I love what I do, I want to invest in becoming even better at it. And if I invest in becoming better at something, it gives me a sense of self esteem. And so, if I get a sense of self esteem, then even if I might not have loved the activity before, I start loving it. And so, this is that virtuous cycle that creates your calling quadrant. The third question is, what's your value proposition? And this gets back to, what problems do I want to solve? But why is it that the features and the benefits, my skills, my abilities, my capabilities are the ones that are best positioned to create that value? And so that requires you to be thinking about, how are you making the world a better place by pursuing your values? And then the final question is really, with whom should I trade? That is the one place where objectivism also plays a very fundamental role. Because notice that these first three things that I'm talking about, they are very I focused, as if I'm the only one that can solve all of these problems in the world that I have undertaken. But whom do I trade recognizes that the bigger the problem, the more you need other people who are similarly minded, have the same values, to come with you and engage in meaningful trade relationships. So you can focus on what you love doing and what you're good at, but the activities that are required for the purpose that you're not good at, somebody else may be good at. Somebody else may love doing those things. And so you come together and trade with them. Everything here is really based on principles that are underscored by objectivism.
Thank you very much. That's very eye opening.
Yes.
And regarding that, so we know that there are like few challenges that everyone faces in the world of business, and I wanted to ask, so objectivism, we know that it places a strong emphasis on rational thinking and evidence-based kind of like decision making. So how can individuals apply these specific principles while navigating the challenges of entrepreneurship or like business world, all while resisting the influence of emotional or like societal pressures?
So, I actually don't think that emotions are bad, or that there are pressure, that it's emotion versus reason. And
Mm,
in fact, if you read Ayn Rand herself carefully, she will also say that, in fact, you want to pay attention to your emotions, because your emotions are your gut reactions based on your values, based on your prior thinking, right? So when you feel anger about something, it's because your values are being violated. When you feel joy, it's because you're celebrating something that is truly something that you value. And so, across the spectrum of emotions, that's a very natural part of us, and we shouldn't be rejecting it. As it relates to pressures from society, again, I don't think that society only creates negative pressures for you. So, in these trade relationships that I was talking about, uh, y- there is this thing that comes about, what's your village, what's your community, and used to be that your village was what you were born in, and you didn't necessarily have a choice. But as independent thinkers, we actually have a choice about which world we want to be part of. Remember, we don't talk about the world out there. It's, what's my world? What are the places I want to go? Who are the people who belong in my world? What are the things that I want to do? In that kind of choice, society can have a very positive relationship with the individual. So I first and foremost want to think about the fact that these are all not negative. Now, there are aspects where you need to be very active minded. And this is why the focus on reason becomes important. You know, why do you want to choose to be in the village that you're in? That again requires you to reflect on your values, which again asks you the question of why are these my values and not everything else? So, when you're talking about societal pressures or conformity pressures, this is when you feel like someone is saying to you, believe this because this is what you should believe, not necessarily because you believe it because you are um, persuaded by those beliefs, right? And so, reason is your tool of cognition. It is your ability to think through what pressures of societies are pressures, i.e., negative, versus what values the society offers you. I don't want to be a Robinson Crusoe on an island. That would be just so boring, right? And so, who are the people and why do I want them to be in my life? And that is a fundamental act of individual choice. But that individual choice cannot be taken lightly. It has to be very deliberate, very intentional.
I think it's a very interesting take because a lot of people, when they think about objectivism or Ayn Rand's philosophy, they think of this very like straightforward, very um, like how to say, very not kind of like subjective kind of thinking that is like that has nothing to do with emotions or like listening to others. So I think it's very important that at least today we get to talk about how it can be actually misinterpreted and how we can actually like kind of like listen to those emotions but still like act rationally. um, so regarding ethics. So let's talk about ethics a little bit.
Mhm.
So we already know that objectivism promotes adherence to individual rights, but also to ethical principles. So how can the entrepreneurial activities align with these principles and respect the right of others? And if there are, according to you, clear boundaries that can be established, and what actions, for example, are the limits that should never be crossed? Does it make sense?
Yes, of course it makes sense. So, again, one of the things that I caution young readers of objectivism is to not quickly jump into ethics of coulda, shoulda, woulda without necessarily thinking about it in terms of the other elements of philosophy, too: metaphysics, epistemology, politics, ethics, right? So these are all parts of a system. And ethics matter because it really relates just like politics in terms of your relationship with others. In this, objectivism is not the only philosophy that focuses on this notion of positive and negative rights, right? And so the distinction of what is okay is very well illustrated in Atlas Shrugged, in Fountainhead, in terms of what are ethically based societies. And in fact, if you think about it, the classic situation where John Galt ends up telling Dagny, I could persuade you or force you to stay in Galt's Gulch. But I don't want that, right? I don't want you to do it for me. I want you to do it for you. So, this fundamental idea that you should live your life for your own sake and not either expect others to live their life for your sake, nor expect or say that I will live for other people. That's a very fundamental thought of independence. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have the love of your life, as in Dagny and John Galt, right? My husband is my best friend. I've married him, I've known him for 35 years. Um, he's the love of my life. But I don't want him to say, oh, I'm hanging around with you because I pity you, I feel sad for you. that would not be the reason why we want to be hanging out together. I want him to hang out with me because I make him happy, I make him joyful. And if he were to turn around and say to me, well, you have to do this because I said so, I'd be out the door, right? As I should be. So, what are relationships, and particularly the more meaningful the relationship, the more one should be thinking in terms of what Ayn Rand calls the trader principle. Whether in your professional or in your personal life, you should be thinking about the other as an independent equal, neither a master nor a slave. And so the two of you want to come together in terms of voluntary trade because this is what you believe in your best judgment is what you want to do.
Thank you for shedding a light on that. Before we move forward, I want to remind the audience to be active and ask questions. If we see a question, we will for sure have time to answer it. So feel free, and you can also express your opinion. So we just talked about personal and professional relationships and how objectivism or like principles that come with objectivism can play a role on that. Now let's talk about pursuing one's own happiness because it is a big part of objectivism. So, how do you think that this philosophy impacts an individual's approach to work, and what role should personal fulfillment or like personal happiness play in one's career decisions?
Yes. So I've written a Forbes article which is called The Meaning of Work for a Happy New Year, because it was written in a New Year period, or Happy Life. And I would encourage you to, you can Google very quickly and find it and put the link in too if you'd like in this live stream. But the premise of it is twofold. One, work is really about you choosing where is it that you want to put your producer energies in. Because even before you can consume, you need to be able to produce. And that's a fundamental value creating mindset that you have. How does that relate to happiness? Well, on the one hand, happiness is hard work. It is not whim worship. It is not something that you achieve just, oh, today I'm going to be happy, so I'm happy, right? Or today I want to gratify myself in this particular idea, so that's how I'm going to do it. In fact, happiness is hard work because there are a lot of questions that come in. Well, what is it that makes me happy? Why does this make me happy and not something else? How do I go about achieving something that will make me happy? Because again, Rand talks about the fact that happiness is a state of consciousness that comes from the achievement of one's values. But that requires you to define your values and to act in consistency with your values. And that also means that you want to give up short term instant gratification activities for a longer term goal of achieving your values. So that's why I say happiness is hard work. How does it relate to the work that you've done? Um, when I was 40, I felt younger than I was 30. When I was 50, I felt younger than when I was 40. And now you might say, but wait a minute, right? You're aging, Rajshree. But this again comes to another quote by Ayn Rand that I really resonate with, that youth, or to achieve at the end of one's life, the values that you start off with is the secret to eternal youth. So it takes time to find, develop, sustain your values. But that sense of deep contentment that you get because you feel like your life is worth living, because you have invested in personal and professional relationships that bring you joy on a sustained sense. When going to success, I love what I do and I'm good at it. Being able to say that takes effort, but it's so worth it.
That's very inspiring to hear. Um, and we know that so when we talk about innovation or loving one's work or like anything that has to do with success in the business world, we know that all of this like to some extent they involve taking risks and challenging the status quo. So how does objectivism's emphasis on rational thinking and individual creativity handle this approach to innovation, and can it sometimes maybe lead to like setbacks that need to be overcome?
Yes. So, one reason why I love Atlas Shrugged as a novel is that each and every hero in the book, whether it is Hank Reardon, whether it's Francisco D'Ancona, whether it's Dagny Taggart, all of them, or John Gall, notice that they are innovators, they're creators, they're entrepreneurs, they're giants of industry, not because of cronyism, right? And so the true villains in Atlas Shrugged are the James Taggarts, who seem to be the successful businessmen, but they do it by graft. They do it by cronyism. They do it by consuming other people's creativity and effort. So, how does objectivism relate and how does rational thinking relate to innovation, risk taking, creativity, entrepreneurial mindset? Well, there are two ways. One, there is this focus on what is the relationship of my thoughts with the reality out there, right? What differs or what makes a difference between a dream and a hallucination? A hallucination is me just imagining whatever world I want to do, absolutely devoid of reality. A dream or a vision or wanting to solve a problem in a novel way is really thinking about, well, what are today's unmet needs that I experience? Or I have a particular solution. How does this solution address a particular unmet need? So whether you come at it from experiencing an unmet need or whether you come at it because you have discovered an invention in the process of gaining new knowledge, whether in a scientific lab, in a university, or in an employment context, if you're observant, if you are attentive, if you're challenging the status quo, which is what creativity is, that's where ideas come from. But it's not just enough to identify an idea. Then you now start to thinking about implementation, execution, right? How do I solve this problem? Why is there a value proposition in my solution as opposed to existing solutions? Who else do I need to convince that this is the problem that I'd like to solve and you should solve it with me because it's worthwhile? These are all activities that entrepreneurs undertake, right? And so all of this requires you to be very actively reasoning. In fact, I have a stream of research that says that entrepreneurs that use a scientific approach, you don't have to be a scientist in order to use a scientific approach. They are actually going to be much, much more successful than entrepreneurs that just kind of, have kind of sort of, this is in my mind. So, what is a scientific approach? A scientific approach is saying, this is a problem that I see exists in the world. And I can envision a solution that might solve this problem, right? So if you take Tony Fadell, for instance, avid music player, a music enthusiast, right? Used to carry 10,000 CDs in his backpack when he was in University of Michigan. He saw a problem in as much as he wanted to have his music in the palm of his hand. And so notice that in fact, we think that Apple is the one that introduced the iPod, but it was Tony Fadell as a product champion within Apple that solved that iPod problem, right? So when you're thinking about this is the problem that I want to solve, you can say, I have this idea, but then you can leave it as just that. A scientific thinker or an entrepreneur will say, what is the cause effect linkage? Why is this the best solution to this problem? What assumptions am I making? Or what exists in the current CD framing that I can challenge and examine and create an alternative solution to. So it is a focus on what are my underlying premises or assumptions? How valid are they? How do I go about testing it? How do I go about asking people, am I the only one that has this problem that I want to luck 10,000 CDs in my backpack? Or do others experience that too? So that requires you to engage with reality, ask questions, get feedback, incorporate that feedback, have what Ayn Rand calls an active mindset, which is different from a closed or an open mindset, right? A closed mindset is no matter what evidence you give me, I'm not going to believe it because I have my mind already made up. An open mind, as she says, is like sitting on a fence. Well, if you say this, I agree. If somebody else says something else, I agree, right? But an active mind is one that has convictions, believes what they believe, and have opinions based on prior thinking, but is open to new evidence, to new perspectives, and is willing to make the hard work of saying, wait a minute, what assumptions does this new evidence challenge? How should I be thinking about this differently? And now that I have received this new evidence from reality, how do I adjust my own actions, thoughts, and values?
Interesting. I think that's a very nice distinction to make between different kinds of thinking. Before we move on, I wanna emphasize two things. So first of all, we put the link for the article that we just talked about. I encourage everyone to go read it after the live. And we have questions here that asks, how do you strike a balance between your personal values and that of family and religion when it comes to becoming an entrepreneur?
Um, you know, Again, since we're talking about the relationship of objectivism and Rand
Yes.
herself into thinking about your own life, one of the things that Rand always said is religion is a primitive form of philosophy. Uh, what she meant by that is that, every one of us needs to define a code of values that we want to live by. And a primitive form of philosophy simply meant, and that's what philosophy is. And implicitly or explicitly, whether you take it from your traditions, your family upbringing, from your culture, your community, or whatever religion you belong in, what that gives you is a sense of what your values are. I personally find that your philosophical values definitely define how you live your life, personally as well as professionally. So when I say that I think that the trader principle is a fundamental value, right, or a fundamental view, why do I say that? Because it recognizes human dignity in both professional and personal relationships. And so, how do I strike a balance between my personal values and that of family and religion? I don't see a need for balance because they're one and the same. My personal values are the ones that drive what I do at work in the same way that it drives what I do in my family lives. So, with my children, it is so easy. Trust me, I used to be this parent that would say, when a kid when I was brought up in a very much you do this, you don't do this, log kya kahenge, which in Hindi translated in English is what will people say, right? So that talk about that societal pressure, and you should do this just because we told you to do this. And so I promised myself that when I was a parent, I would never say to my kids, because I said so. um, Sometimes when your toddler is having a tantrum, reasoning with them is not the right way, and sometimes it's okay to say, because I said so, I have learned. But very early on, and it's very difficult to do this, because as a parent, the worst thing that you can observe and have to be silent is to watch your kid make mistakes, because you want to jump in and you want to help them, and you want to give them your wisdom and advice from what you have learned through the school of hard knocks. But both Rob and I have been very conscientious about not being these helicopter parents to our kids, right? To teach them independence, to be there for them should they ask us for advice, but not necessarily impose on them our will. So we like to talk about the fact that we're consultants in our grown kids' lives. Now, of course, before they are adults, the relationship between a parent and a child is different. But after they're adults, we're consultants in their lives. We're there for them to talk to us, ask us for advice, but the decision is theirs. So that's the way that I would look at in terms of family and personal values, and the same holds as being an entrepreneur. So my team members, my staff, people who report to me, people who I report to, again, we very much use the straighter principle concept, even with my PhD students. When they come to my office, I say, you have to think of yourself as an independent equal to me. I may know more than you, but if we are creating new knowledge, then both of us are in the realm of the unknown. And so your creativity, your innovation, your prodigiousness is just as important as my wisdom. And in that sense, both of us are independent equals. So that's the way that I think about being an entrepreneur too. In fact, most of the successful entrepreneurs, like Ed Snider, would say, find good people and let them do their job, which means empower them to use their mind, their creativity. Because if I have to tell you what to do, if I have to do, use my wisdom and my thoughts, and then you become the robot automaton that's just going to do that, why do I need you?
That makes
I hope
sense.
I'm answering that question.
Yeah, I think it did. And thank you for asking the question. If anyone has any other questions, feel free. We still have a little bit of time. I want to ask you about something else. So, we just talked about how objectivism encourages like doing one's best or pursuing excellence, right? So how can entrepreneurs or innovators balance this pursuit of excellence with the practical constraint? Because we know that when we talk about philosophy, applying it to real life cases, especially today, can be very complex. So, what kind of like challenges a person might face in real world business situations, and are there like potential downsides for always striving for perfection in like entrepreneurial work?
So, yes, you don't want to have the good be the enemy of the perfect,
Oh yeah,
or the perfect be the enemy of good, right? One of the biggest challenges, right? So, trial and error, experimentation and failure are necessary tools in creating new products, new services, new knowledge. I am in the realm of being an intellectual entrepreneur, and I have several entrepreneurial gigs on the side too. In each of these cases, so again, this goes back to objectivism and rationality. Rationality is not omniscience, it's not infallibility, right? I want to underscore these two aspects about the epistemology of knowledge. Why am I saying that? Because if you know everything and you know you're not going to make a mistake, you're actually in a very safe zone of what is already known. And then it's perfectly okay to listen to what other people are saying, right? And there are lots and lots of times when you are in that safe zone of known knowledge because of past mistakes, trials, and errors by either other people or yourself. But when you're in the realm of being an innovator, by being an entrepreneur, now you're not sure. And you're in what is called in entrepreneurial worlds Knightian uncertainty. You're in unknown unknowns, right? So when Reardon takes 10 years to create Reardon Steel, that exactly tells you that there were 10 years of failures before he finally succeeded. There was no omniscience. There was no infallibility. He continually kept making mistakes and perfected it and stuff. But there was a focus on rationality. There was a focus on this particular hunch of mine yielded success and knowledge on this particular assumption, but it also tells me that this other assumption was wrong and that I need to check it. So then I need to work on it again, right? And so the trial, and by the way, this is not to say that, oh, you should celebrate failure, right? No, when you're failing, it sucks. Excuse my language, right? It's not fun. It joy and success is much, much, emotionally, mentally better than failure, rejection, the depression that one gets into it and stuff. But the learner mindset is what is important here, because the learner mindset says, yeah, what can I learn from this? And so it's not failure itself, it's the attribution of failure. Now, what I end up seeing in many entrepreneurs, and this is also something that I've just recently researched and it's forthcoming in Strategic Management Journal. The title of this article is Spinning an Entrepreneurial Career. And one of the things that we look at there are successful entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs that ventured out from existing organizations to start their own firms in the disk drive industry around the turn of the century. This was a very important industry in the information technology space. One of the things that we find in there is that those entrepreneurs that focused on crafting ventures, not necessarily building products and services. What does crafting ventures mean? It means thinking about what should your team look like. Are they complementary in the capabilities, but are they aligned in the values, right, around the common objective? Do their aspirations and abilities match the purpose that needs to be solved? And then that decides what each person is going to do. So entrepreneurs that pay attention to crafting ventures, not just focusing on a gizmo or a product or a service, are going to be much more successful. Those that don't end up failing. But among those that fail, it is what attribution of failure are you making? If you end up saying, oh, it was a bad environment, or it was this venture capitalist's fault, or it was this particular team member that didn't deliver, those entrepreneurs end up not doing the introspection and they're doomed to repeat the same mistakes again. Whereas those that make internal attribution to failure, what is it that I could have done differently? Even if it is that there was a relationship that went south, which was causing that failure, right? What is it about my choices that caused me to go after this person when I should have gone out with somebody else? So it may be that I went with a friend when I should have really thought about the fact that does this person have the complementary capabilities? So now I need to think about not just a person that's value aligned, but also a person that has important capabilities and is committed to the same problem that I want to solve. So those are the ways that you internally attribute failure, and those entrepreneurs learn.
That's very motivating. And that kind of actually is a good transition to my last question today, as we already started talking a little bit about Tim. Um, so we know that objectivism also promotes the idea of voluntary, mutually beneficial interactions, as we already mentioned, like both in personal relationships and career. And this voluntary exchange is almost like entirely how all business partnerships and transactions work, right? But it is quite never worded in this way. So, how do we see this principle specifically reflected on an individual basis, and how does it contribute to one's success?
So again, this principle, the trader principle that I said, is one that preserves human dignity, in fact, and leads to human flourishing. Why does that happen? And how do you trade with others? So this is now me putting an economist hat on, if you will. right? So when you think about trade, we often think about markets. We often think about, well, I want, to buy my next new phone. So I'm going to go down to, or I'm going to go on Amazon, pick up the phone, or figure out which is the best deal that I can get across my carriers. Should I buy it outright, whatever. So that's a transaction that I am taking on a market place like Amazon, for instance, right? Or going down to my grocery store to buy something. So market transactions are examples of trade which are arm's length. But organizations are also platforms for trade. So, what's an organization? What's a Students for Liberty? Why is it that Brian had to come in, make sure that everything was okay, but then stepped off because he completely trusted Layla to take over? And why is it that you chose to ask me to come in to give this, right? So this is at a level of organizational trade or teams that are being created, right? So Layla and Brian are part of a team within Students of Liberty. And you are reaching out to me, and now I am agreeing to be part of this live stream because it's consistent with my values, right? So notice that this is an informal slash formal organizational platform for trade. And so you and I are in trade right now. All of you who are listening to me, we're part of trade, right? The trade is not money or a product or service that's exchanging hands, but it's just as meaningful. In fact, it could be more meaningful because if it changes or it help changes your mindset, or you learn something from it which you can then take to your day-to-day trade relationships, be it in the platform of teams, organizations, market transactions, this then allows you to think about how should I be approaching an interaction with an individual. And so the trader principle works just as much in friendships as it does in professional relationships. Am I answering your question, or was there a part that I didn't answer?
No, no, it totally makes sense. I just want to know if anyone has any follow up question on that, or just like a reflection of their opinion. I don't think I have anything here. Well, then that means that we have come to the end of our discussion. That was very, very delightful. I enjoyed every bit. I think all of this applicable, advice is something we all can take from today's live stream and apply it to our own lives when it comes to business, work, or even personal relationships, right? So I want to thank you once more for joining our live stream today, and I hope that you have a wonderful rest of the week. Um,
Thank you, Leila. Really appreciated the sharp questions that you asked and the very comfortable flow and trade of ideas. Appreciate you having me on your platform.
that's nice to hear. Thank you very much.
Okay, bye.
Bye bye.